Hey guys, what's going on? My name is Frank Reynolds and welcome to another episode of Is It Worth It with a Twist. Last week on my Desolation Called Peace review, I mentioned that many of my reviews to this point have ended up being worth it. And I think part of that is because when you invest so much time in a novel, you want to root for it. You want it to be worth it. And if you make it to the end, it probably was. It's such a big time commitment, especially when you're a slow reader like myself, to get through a story, especially in fantasy, which is a lot of what I focus on, that can be, 500 plus pages. If you're going to sacrifice that amount of time to get through it, it was probably worth it. But that doesn't mean that I finish every book that I start. I think I'm like a lot of readers out there. I have put stuff down after a chapter, 2 chapters, half a book, because it just wasn't worth it to me. And today, I want to look at 4 novels over the last year that I have started in the fantasy genre and not finished. Maybe more of a negative review than the typical 60 plus on the worthy meters that you're used to seeing here on this channel. But it's good because I want to give you guys some perspective as to what maybe I don't like that much and what I don't find a good use of my time. Basically, what's not worth it to me. Now, I want to make something clear here. This isn't necessarily foolproof, okay? Like, my decision making partway through a novel can be incorrect. There are novels that I have reviewed here that I actually stopped reading for a while and came back to and either reread or picked up from the point I left off and ended up loving them. 2 that come to mind are Deerskin, which, while I didn't necessarily love, I did rate in the 60s on the worthy meter and therefore thought it was worth it for you guys, especially because of some of the feelings it evoked and emotional context present. And The Name of the Wind. The Kingkiller Chronicle, my all-time favorite read in the science fiction / fantasy genre, was a book that after I read The Name of the Wind, I didn't like it. I came back to it 4 years later because I was hearing great things. Multiple people told me, you gotta give it another shot. I did, and I couldn't be more thankful for it because, again, it is my all-time favorite read. So opinions change over time, and maybe you're just in a bad space when you give it a shot, or maybe it's not what you're looking for at that present moment, or maybe you read something on Audible and you don't like the narrator, and that detracts from the book's value. So you give it a shot just reading it without a narrator, and you'll love it. That's what happened to me with The Name of the Wind, and my opinion was totally different. That's why I try to give you guys Audible check-ins as well. So that is important to note. I could go back to these books in 3 months, 6 months, 6 years, and have a totally different perspective and love them when I get there. But over the last year, when I've given them a shot, I didn't like them that much. And the first book that comes to mind when I talk about the novels that I didn't finish and that weren't worth it for me is a huge novel from Tor Books that people have been talking about like crazy. The sequel's coming out later this year, and that is The Unspoken Name. The Unspoken Name is a story about an orc called Sorway, Kasorway, I guess. There's a C, yeah, Kasorway, and basically goes through hell as she is a sacrifice for her community's god. She's been groomed that way for her entire life, and when it comes time to give her life for this deity, she is rescued by this wizard, and they set off on this grand adventure together that leads her to, again, kind of going through hell. And I got through part 1 of the book, which is roughly a third of the story, and one for me. The biggest issue I had with The Unspoken Name is the pacing. Wow, what a mess. Part 1 could have been a full novel, but each chapter feels like it takes a year. It's so short. I mean, we go from a series of dialogue between 2 characters to a sentence that describes like 8 months passed and we're here now. I'm like, what? Like, so many things could have happened in that 8-month time span. I put up with it at first, and when she finally got to her first primary destination of the novel, I was like, okay, maybe things are, starting to, click. Maybe we're finally there. We kind of had to put up with those first couple of chapters to get here. And things are okay, they go well. And then part 1 ends and part 2 starts. It says 5 years later. And I'm like, I'm kind of done with this. Like the pacing is a mess. And I didn't necessarily care about Kasorwe in the way that I expected to. She's a strong female protagonist. She, again, kind of goes through hell at the beginning of the story to, I'm sure, strengthen her morale and her physical prowess in preparation for what she is going to eventually do later in the story. But it just, I don't know, it didn't work for me that well. I really wanted to like it. I probably held on to it longer than I should have. I think that there are some things the author could have done to tweak the story and make it more likable. For instance, I don't even think the first 2 chapters are necessary in this book. I think that we could have started as she's on her journey with the wizard, and we could have seen the rest of it in flashbacks or in internal monologues or through dialogue. We didn't need to spend time in her community at the beginning. It was kind of slow while also being ridiculously fast-paced. It's very difficult to describe, but if you pick up the book, you'll kind of understand. And it's a shame because the writing, the prose, is beautiful. It's really well-written book, and y'all know how much I love good writing, and that is present here. But the way the story is mapped out, a story which isn't even bad to this point. Again, there's nothing wrong with it, but I couldn't stand the way this book was paced. The second novel that I started reading a few months back, I'd heard a lot about it, and I know that she has a crazy popular book series, A Court of Roses and Thorns or something. Each book's like a court of, and then there's more to come after that. Her first series, Throne of Glass. Decided to give it a shot. Got 2 chapters in, realized, wow, this really isn't for me. Part of the reason is because it's a YA novel. You can tell based on the writing style that it is meant for younger audiences. That's not to say that content isn't mature. I've actually heard that the content is pretty mature, especially when we talk about sexual situations. I've heard that it gets pretty mature as the books go on, but the writing style is weak compared to some of these other authors that I'm used to reading in more mature adult fantasy. After the first 2 chapters, I knew I couldn't do it. I could not do this for 7 books, let alone the first Throne of Glass book. So if you're a fan of YA, you might like it, but I've never been a huge fan of YA. I love the Harry Potter novels. They are some of my all-time favorite reads. That's really all that I'm a huge YA fan of. I mean, I know a lot of people disagree with me on my takes of the Inheritance cycle, but that's a YA, and I can't stand the writing style there. I like more poetic writing, and I like it when you aren't limited by the constraints that come with a YA protagonist. There are times in YA where the story calls for a coming-of-age character, and I even have that in my own story that I'm writing, but I present it in a way that is not YA. And there is some misconception as to what YA is, and maybe we'll get to that in another video. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is for children. It means that it's focused on younger audiences, and I think that people confuse that, and then there's some backlash that comes with a story that might be more mature than they thought it would be when they went into it. But in this case, the writing style was very amateurish, maybe done purposely. And it actually gives me pause in starting the Court of X, Y, and Z series. I believe the author is Sarah Maas. And it gives me pause to start that because I've heard amazing things about it. It's been on the bestseller list for a while, but the first series, just a couple chapters in, wasn't for me. Third novel I tried over the last year that just, again, was not for me. 3 Dark Crowns. This is a series about, from what I remember, it's like a series about 3 sisters who are being raised on their own, and they have different magical powers, and they're eventually gonna have to duke it out for the crown. I didn't find anything wrong with the characters here. They actually have some interesting powers, and there's some good character development to go along with it. But I thought that the secondary characters were very poorly developed compared to the protagonists. Every time a new secondary character was introduced, I was just uninterested, and it was very tough to maintain an interest in these primary characters when all of their interactions are happening with people I don't care about. And it was tough to put down because, again, I wanted to see what happened. I wanted to see who was going to win this battle. And I wanted to know more about their powers and their pasts and their connections with one another. But I just couldn't do it for the other elements in play. It's one I might come back to eventually. I'll probably start it over. But yeah, overall, it just a little bit disappointing. It's also a YA. The writing style is certainly more poetic and adult-esque than Throne of Glass, but that wasn't my issue with the story. It was more the secondary characters surrounding our primary characters. The last book on my list is one I really wanted to like. I really wanted to like it. I started it about a year ago, so forgive me if I don't remember the details as much, but I do want to touch on it because it has received a lot of praise, particularly from George R.R. Martin, and whenever he gives his stamp of approval, it's typically pretty good. And that is Joe Abercrombie's Half a King. Joe Abercrombie is a huge author in the fantasy landscape, and wow, it's my first book by him, and I don't like his writing style at all. It's just a me thing. I don't think it's bad, it's just I'm not a fan of it. It is significantly different from a guy like Pat Rothfuss, who is my idol when it comes to writing. It's choppy, it's short, the story is like breakneck. It moves so fast. Maybe not as fast as The Unspoken Name, but it moves quickly here. And the dialogue, much like the writing, is choppy. I think this is something I've read about Joe Abercrombie before, that's sort of his style, and some people really don't like it. It makes me hesitant to start the First Law trilogy, which I've considered multiple times. I've heard great things about it, but I've also heard these complaints are similar for that one, and I couldn't do it. I got about halfway through Half a King and realized that I can't do this for, I think it's 4 books long currently. Maybe that's the whole thing. Maybe there's more to come. I'm not sure. Sorry about that. But I couldn't do it. So that's another book that just, for me, it wasn't worth finishing. So those 4 novels right there are proof that every book isn't worth it to me. When we look at The Unspoken Name, Throne of Glass, Three Dark Crowns, and Half a King, we see books that are great to some people, and some of these books have extremely good reviews on Goodreads and Amazon and these places where lots of people put their opinions out there. But for me, wasn't worth it, and I hope this gives you guys a better idea of what I like and what I don't like in books rather than just what makes it count for me. I'll usually give a thriller the entire novel before I offer an opinion on it. And that's why you'll probably see in these reviews the thriller novels having worse ratings than the fantasy novels, because those are ones that I might just give up on halfway through if it's not for me, because they're so big and so long. If I finish a fantasy novel, it's typically going to be worth it, at least in some capacity. So again, hope this was helpful for you guys moving forward. These books might be for you, and I might come back to them one day and absolutely love them. But as of right now, in April of 2021, they weren't worth it for me. If you're looking for some books that are worth it, maybe go back and check through the channel. Most of them on there currently are, so something to consider when you go back and try to pick out your newest and freshest read. Thanks a lot. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another book review. I really appreciate your time, y'all. Thanks a lot. Keep reading and watching TV shows. We'll be back sooner than later. See y'all later. Thanks.